All right, welcome everybody to the January 10th, 2022 Public Kubernetes Steering Committee meeting. If you haven't already added your name to the list of attendees, please do so at this point. And as a reminder, this meeting is being recorded and is subject to the code of conduct, which basically says treat each other well, and we will get started. Looks like a couple updates were being added under CNCF updates. I don't know who that was, but would you like to mention that briefly?
Hi, that was me. Sorry. The email for the maintainer track session is out, so we need to get the word out to all the chairs and leads who might have missed the email.
All right. Does someone want to take an AI to do that either during the chairs and leads meeting or to the Slack and mailing list?
So the note was sent to leads, I believe, already. Okay. So I would say that yes, it's worth mentioning in the chairs tech leads meeting, but also each of the steering liaisons for your respective SIGs, user groups, working groups, what have you, should reach out to your groups as well.
Good luck spelling liaisons. I mess that up every single time. All right.
Every time over here, every time.
Yeah. How many I's can one word have in a row before you hit a consonant? Come on. All right. Jumping down to our topics. We had a couple really brief ones up at the top of the list. One follow-up from last meeting, we had talked about setting up a sync with the code of conduct folks, and there was a charter update pending from them that I think we wanted to talk about in person, but I don't think anyone actually took the AI to figure out a date. So I don't know if that's on us or on them, but can one of us
I'll take it.
an AI to schedule that? Thank you.
I would say maybe Tim, since he's their liaison.
Oh, that's right. We have that now. Yay.
Yeah, I can do that.
Yay, that's new.
Now you're gonna spell liaison a second time.
How many times can we spell it in one meeting?
You need
one
a keyboard
suggestion
shortcut
for that would maybe be to make it recurring. I don't like recurring meetings, but quarterly is not too bad. And we tend to sort of set up these as one-offs and then forget about it and it drifts. So if we do it recurring, then we can move it if we need to.
Yeah, I like that. It's just on the calendar. We'll have a surprise as we notice it's on the calendar soon, and maybe we adjust it, but at least it's on the calendar as opposed to getting missed. The item right after that's on me as well. I actually pushed this to its own topic on the agenda. The deduplication that had been asked for is straightforward enough in theory, but it leads to some other questions that I think we should discuss in public. So that's at the very end of the agenda, and we'll see if we get to it. But I want to wait on that for now. And if we don't, I'll start a thread in the issue on GitHub.
Okay. All right, next item, Micah, I think you are up for this.
I'm going to liaise in an untitled capacity, but still liaise nonetheless. Yeah, so for the product security committee, our I don't know if it's not technically I couldn't find our specific charter, but it's in our documentation that we'd have minimum 7 members. We currently have 7. One is stepping down, and we have 3 associates, and I think we do try to limit our associates to 3. We just have had enough issues come up, not anything major, but just enough work come up in tending to reports and following through on that everyone felt it would be nice to have a few extra folks and rotate on. Our associates have been on as associates for a while. We just haven't had openings. So we wanted to just increase the size from the minimum 7. And so I just wanted to give everyone here a heads up, answer any questions anyone had. Another motivation was just at least 1 or 2 folks currently on the committee would like to rotate off at some point this year, but we didn't want to leave everyone shorthanded. So we wanted to just increase the size to have some continuity and carryover while we transition new people on. So if anyone has a concern or anything, let's talk about that or hear about that. But really just wanted to give an update here as to that status.
Sounds good to me. I think the volume of, I've been saying this for 3 or 4 years, but the volume of things that team's going to be doing is only going to increase.
Do we have an official promotion process defined for associates into, I think making that visible would be important. I'm not sure, like it's been a while since I've read the security process documentation, but it would be.
Yeah, we do have a process. I think it's just specified as a minimum of a 3-month that's functioning as an associate, and our associate level tasks are defined as handling issues that are already public, or low level security issues that are technically security issues, but can be handled in public without any major concern. So we don't have necessarily a box checking process to you're an associate, so now you can be a full member, other than just being in the rotation for 3 months.
Got it. I see a hand from Christoph.
Yeah, I just wanted to ask the question, like, from a sustainability perspective, is there a good pipeline of folks coming in? I know, like, the Security Response Committee is it's a fairly trusted role to bring people into. Is there interest? Is there like a solid pipeline of people that are interested and are working at building that trust to bring into the security responsibility? Are there any concerns about like future sustainability there?
Yeah, I don't, not from anyone that I've talked to, not on the PSC. I think we actually, part of this is to open up more slots as associates, because there's just not that much associate work. So we have other people that we want to nominate to be associates, and we want to give them the opportunity to actually do something. So that part of that is promoting our current associates and then opening those opportunities.
Cool. Thanks for bringing that up. And yeah, I'm happy to see a promotion pipeline working and being expanded on.
Yeah, I do have some other. This isn't kind of oversighty, but just there, I have some thoughts that I've been meaning to type up and can send to steering. Just nothing majorly concerning, but just to add a little more accountability to the PSC in terms of just making sure we're handling issues well. And I speak that talking about for myself as well as just the PSC more broadly. It's we don't have open meetings just based on the necessity of our work, and we do give some reports, but I think some more specific metrics might be good to be able to report up to either steering or I don't know. I guess steering is probably the place to report those, just so that that we're doing the right things in the right timeliness, without compromising any currently embargoed or currently undisclosed issues.
Yeah, that sounds similar to conversations we had with code of conduct folks, where like metrics that sort of take out details but give some visibility to the pipeline. Be like, this many reports, this many handled, this many pending, that kind of thing.
I think like MTTR is probably one that I would want to add, or P100 of our response time or resolution time is another one that I probably want to see tracked.
Bob said half of mine, which was the transparency report, but also the annual report too. We should take this offline and figure out how we can help with that, because we have 2 major reporting vessels. So I think that would be great places for it, like the annual report and the transparency reports.
And I can work on that since I'm the liaison for y'all. So
great, awesome. Yeah, I think The annual report makes a ton of sense. Maybe something even quarterly, just so that we have more accountability for ourselves, good external motivation. Because I think right now it's most of our motivation is just intrinsic, which is good. We're we're motivated people, but I think having some good external pressure could be a positive thing. Yeah, I'd love to talk about that.
All right. Well, that's a good segue to our next topic, which is actually the annual report prep. So there were a few things in here. The first one was just a quick update to the dates that got reviewed already. The second one is a link to the updated questions. I think we've had a few iterations on this, and I think what's there is probably a reasonable place for this year's template. It's not quite as automated as I had hoped, but I think it's a lot more targeted and actionable than what we had last year, folding in some of the feedback on like specific questions and crisp questions with numbers that are pretty easy to compute. So I think 3 people have weighed in on that. Anyone else who wants to weigh in, please take a look, and I'd like to close on that in the next couple of days. So that takes us to Christoph. So the workflow we were envisioning was we'd have these templates, and then there would be a generator that would take that template and stamp out a file in each SIG and working group folder, ideally pulling in some calculated stuff for generating links based on SIG's YAML. So Christoph, do you want to talk through where the generator's at?
We have the generator from last year. There have been some stuff that I need to do a rebase, and that rebase is done. I've got it in a local branch. The next kind of step is taking the template once the template is merged and making a Go text template version of it, which should be fairly straightforward. And then updating the PR. I don't have tests written for it, but I think we could probably do those in a follow-up. Yeah, it should be fairly straightforward, and we can get that done, in the next few days when we get the actual working group template and stuff all merged in. So no problems there. Okay, cool. So it sounds like we should be ready to start outreach to leads by mid to late this week. I think, is it Thursday that we have a leads meeting? I forgot my calendar. Tuesday. At the very least, we can give people a heads up in the meeting. Tuesday and Thursday. Okay, so we can give people a heads up tomorrow and hopefully have it ready Thursday and then start outreach. So the next item I just included for reference, once the templates are there, we'll do an announcement. Paris had mentioned doing that, and then the liaisons can reach out to their individual groups. This one, the Liaison Responsibilities Doc, sort of got hoisted from last meeting. I wasn't sure if we wanted to discuss this here or if it was ready, or if we wanted to just have it as for your reference and review it offline. Paris, I think that was your.
Yeah, I can do any of the above. So just for the sake of time, we can just do it offline if y'all are cool with that.
Okay.
Just read it, leave comments in the doc. Because this is sort of the baseline for conversations that you should have for annual reports. I tried to make it as either what we already do or stuff that we've discussed that we need to do, and left a lot of my wild ideas out for this go anyway. So it's pretty, I think it's pretty basic for right now, just to kick us off. So let me know what y'all think, and we can get something merged in as soon as you review.
Then we can start separate issues or PR discussions around wild ideas.
Yes, exactly.
All right. Thank you for kicking that off, Paris and Tim. All right, moving on to the next item. There was a request for forming a working group batch. So there was a pull request with the proposed charter. And I think Abdullah, is Abdullah on the call? Yeah, Abdullah is on. Do you want to describe this briefly, and then we can have time for questions or discussion synchronously?
Sounds good. I think we have, do we have Aldo as well? Yeah, we have Aldo as well. So he can help me out. Yeah, so for quite a few time, lots of batch related issues was coming to SIG scheduling. The issue here is that some of these requests were actually cross SIG. And so we thought that this, like having a working group that engages leads from SIG apps, SIG node, and SIG scheduling would serve better these types of workloads. There's a feeling that these workloads did not get their fair share of attention in Kubernetes. I mean, for a good reason, probably at the beginning, we needed to focus on it, on one type of workload, and then we can expand. But it seems that we are at the point where the project is mature enough to consider batch more seriously, so to speak. And so the goal here is to try to improve the batch experience in core Kubernetes, not just trying to build something on top of Kubernetes. And the idea is to improve the job, like focus on things like the job API, and have discussions around how can we implement job queuing properly. Whether those APIs are going to end up in core Kubernetes or not, maybe is not the issue as much as we want them to work well with the rest of the Kubernetes like core components, like the scheduler, kube controller manager. We are trying to make sure that we have an ecosystem that reduces duplication as much as possible. I can give one example here. Again, the job API. Like it is really sad that like every new batch framework that builds on top of Kubernetes, they come up with their own job API. So that's just one example of how we're trying to put some momentum to not have this duplication, try to support it in core Kubernetes, and provide the hooks needed to build on that something more complicated. And so that is the overall, like, I guess, motivation behind this proposal. It touches, again, like scheduling, apps, and sometimes Node, if we think about like HPC workloads. That's why it did not fit just in the SIG scheduling, for example, charter. We wanted something more comprehensive, I guess, more focused.
Yeah, thanks for the overview. So I guess open it up to questions from steering folks and also from community folks. I don't know if there are representatives from any of the stakeholder SIGs. I know Abdullah and Aldo, you are SIG scheduling, so that's great. But apps, autoscaling node, there's been some discussion on the PR and then the thread that led to the PR, but I didn't know if there were questions or other things that folks from the other SIGs wanted to bring up.
I guess the only question for me right now is that it looks like you're trying to determine organizers for the working group. How close are we with that?
I think we have, like, there has been some, like people getting the nod or nominated. I tried personally to get people from SIG apps and Node engaged as well, and I made an explicit effort, and I nominated Magic from SIG apps. I didn't want only people from SIG scheduling because initially only people from SIG scheduling were nominated, and that defeats the purpose of the working group. So, I mean, at this point, it's the people nominated is myself, Wei. I'm from Google, Wei from IBM, and Maciek from Red Hat and SIG Apps. I was trying to understand if someone from SIG Node who is can be a member as well. Daniel has been interested, so maybe in the future, once there is more, I would say, like if she's able to contribute more to core Kubernetes, because it wasn't clear to me if she's a long contributor or not.
So I don't believe that I don't feel that we have documented anywhere that that needs to preclude anyone from participation in the working group. Anyone should be able and empowered to participate in the working group. I think, just making sure that we have a reasonable set of organizers is important to make sure that the working group actually functions, right? So.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, you're specifically talking about the co-chairs, right?
Right, the leads for the working group.
Yep.
Okay, so you're saying that for co-chairs, they don't need to be like TLs or people with an extensive experience or extensive contribution history in the project.
So they don't need to be chairs or TLs of the sponsoring SIGs. Ideally, they are already Kubernetes org members and kind of know how we function day to day. But it's not restricted to chairs, TLs.
Okay. I mean, I'm fine with that. Like, it's just to me that like I was looking for people who are approvers, for example, on core packages that touches the core. Functionality my work was looking at to help us understand if, for example, when a proposal comes in, reason about how that other component can or cannot support the proposed features.
So yeah, so Paris is kind of nailing it in the chat, right? So like organizer means organizer, not maintainer. Those people should be involved in the group, not necessarily run the meetings, right? So the people who are organizers, leads for the working group would be responsible for the kind of administrivia, right? Not necessarily, they can bring, the technical know-how to the group, but they don't necessarily need to be the primary contributors, maintainers of work product from the group, right?
Okay, that's fair. Then, whoever nominated Daniel, I guess we can add Daniel as well as someone who's interested in like invested, I guess, in Node, which is great in general, like in that space, and can bring that experience into the group.
And Dims has his hand up. Yeah, sorry.
Yeah.
Hi, Abdullah. Thanks for the discussion about Daniel, and I +1 all the things that was said by folks. So the one question I had was, there seemed to be a strong contingent of people who chimed in on the discussion, but wanted to do things elsewhere. So how did that end in terms of like, will they still be engaged with us, or will we end up splitting efforts?
That's a good question.
By elsewhere, you meant like in CNCF or like externally to the Kubernetes project, like built on top of Kubernetes, right? Dims, that's what you were referring to?
He's saying yes.
Yes.
Sorry.
Yes. Sorry.
All right, go ahead, Abdullah.
Yeah, right. That's a good question. So we're trying to tackle this like there's a two-pronged approach. One, my plan once this gets approved is to present this to schedule a slot in CNCF. I think it's called users group. It's where that was being discussed, to present our charter to them. And again, to encourage them to contribute to our working group. And the proposal here is that we want to build core features that can basically help them reduce that duplication. That is the goal. And the best place to do this is core Kubernetes, because the dependency goes from them to us, not the other way around. I can't have a dependency from core Kubernetes like as a CRD to the outside, like to some outside project. And so I guess that is the way that I look at it, and that's how I try to argue about any proposal that's being presented from outside Kubernetes. If this is something that we can convince the community to have supported in core Kubernetes, then that's the best place for it, because the dependency is on Kubernetes. If we can't, then I guess our goal should be to try to inform their designs such that they work well with the core Kubernetes components. So that's the approach that I have in mind. I don't know if Aldo has something else to add on how we can collaborate with external communities.
Just to follow up on Dim's question, I think that goal makes sense, specifically to get the people who are wanting to build things externally engaged, so that you have good evidence about what would be good to support, like what primitives would help support that. I don't know if that makes sense to call out in the charter, like
yeah,
collaborating with external groups, that might be helpful. Paris just said exactly the same thing.
Yeah, one thing we have been trying to do, at least not as part of Kubernetes members, but as us, like who people interested in Batch, we reached out to Kubeflow, for example, community, and we've tried to bring them to SIG apps, discussions to say, okay, if you're building, for example, an MPI operator, let's try to find the shortcomings in the job API that allows you to depend on it rather than you building your own internal API, for example. So that it is something actually we did before. That's what I'm trying to say. And I think it was effective. We would try to do it again at the higher level, for example, with frameworks that tries to build like more complex frameworks, I would say.
Okay, thanks. Tim, you've had your hand up. Go ahead.
I think that last little bit of discussion really echoes what we'd want to see, more so than just maybe an existing SIG or working group lead getting involved as an organizer of this working group. But the leaders of this working group need to have the vision that you were just describing to actively bridge between these different entities. That's going to take a lot of activation and effort to keep things moving forward. And then the only other comment that I have really for the charter as it stands right now is kind of again along those lines. The timelines and disbanding part at the end, it's sort of a shrug, which is a normal starting point. But to have some vision for what is going to be sufficiency in both a success or, okay, we're not going to achieve some core thing right now, and a decision point for saying that's where it's ended up. I think that'd be good to formalize a little bit more there.
I think that's a fair point. I mean, to be frank, we don't yet have something concrete where we say, okay, this is the end of the working group. It achieved its goal. We actually feel that. Sorry, Tim, are you still speaking muted?
No, just nodding my head, licking my lips. Sorry.
Okay, because like it looks to me that okay. And so actually, like one of the things that we are considering as a potential end goal is converting this into a SIG. I don't know if that will happen or not, but it might. Like if, for example, we come up with a new controller that does queuing, who's going to own that? That could serve as, let's say more mass, like bigger mass of code ownership if we add to it, for example, the job API from SIG apps. then you have a clearly or a better defined scope for a SIG that owns code and has a core, component that drives that ownership.
Yeah, I think that makes sense. I am +1 to what Tim said, where the current state of the PR is pretty normal to start with, but maybe I'm particularly sensitive to it because I just put together the working group annual report questions. And one of the questions is like, is your roadmap still on track? Like, what is your roadmap? And so I'm looking at this as a new working group thinking like, what is the roadmap? And there's a lot of possibilities there, but it seems like a first step should be to get the roadmap clearer. So maybe explicitly saying we want to clarify the roadmap as one of the first things we do would be helpful.
I think there starting out to, Abdullah, you described a number of interesting potential outcomes maybe for a year plus from now. Put those and put a milestone sometime during the year to reflect on which path it feels like it's trending towards. You can't have a roadmap that goes a year or two out with any actual reality, but to note your vision of the possible kind of vector space of the roadmaps that might play out and set some timelines for deciding which one it feels like is viable.
Sounds good. Thanks.
Go ahead, Christoph.
Just had a couple comments. So like I read through the proposal and yeah, similar to everyone else's comments, like the current charter is very normal for this kind of part of the process where things are being formed, and it's we're still fairly loose in ideas. One, like a couple thoughts and comments that I had in there. Number one, just listening to some of the comments, I'm concerned, and I think we need to just be aware of as far as engaging other groups and folks that have already been working in this space, is understanding, and like typically we don't try to king make certain things, like say this is the one true way to do a thing, unless that really is the only one true way to do it, and there's significant risks in splintering things. So I'd be very interested in like, what are the problems that are solved today that we can only solve by kind of collaborating in this fashion, as opposed to what we have typically liked to do, which is enable the ecosystem to like develop things, so that there may not necessarily be one true way to do things. So understanding, like figuring out those problems, which again, we're still very early in that process, and the charter kind of reflects that like there's still a lot of like research and talking to be done there. But yeah, the thought there is just making sure that we don't necessarily king make that this is the one true way to do it, unless that is there is a very strong reasoning behind that. The second comment that I had was around component ownership, and like again going to timelines for the working group. Typically when we create new components, if there is like code bases or definitions and that kind of stuff, making sure that the working group is very much engaged constantly with its sponsoring SIGs, because ultimately the SIG is where the resultant work from this would be owned. So if like code is being created or long-lived definitions are being created, the SIGs ultimately responsible for that, in this case, like apps or scheduling or stuff like that, they would need to be on board as far as like, yes, we understand this and are going to take ownership of those pieces. Yeah, I think that's all I had. Thank you.
So quickly for the first point, I think this applies to even services as well. We have been trying, for example, to implement multi-cluster service discovery, and like different frameworks try to do it their own way, and then we managed to come up with an API that somehow provides some unification around the sensible approach. That is, I guess, one guiding example like I could look at in general, like services in general, right? Like even the like a concept of a service, how you implement load balancers behind them, and whatnot. So I guess my point here is that there's a ton of history and examples that we have that we can try to draw comparisons with and guide us in the way that we're trying to propose new features that does not lock people into specific approaches, but simplify things that are clearly common and doesn't need to be replicated. And another general comment regarding batch, it's an extremely fragmented ecosystem that is, I guess, to the point that is on K8s. I mean, that at some point is not like, it's not functional in my opinion. And this is what we're trying to bring is some form of unity around common approaches to solve some extremely common problems. Again, like queuing is one of them. We've heard that from our customers over and over and over again. There is no approach to do that in Kubernetes. And the existing systems, they try to retrofit existing platforms on top of Kubernetes. And there are a ton of problems around that. So we want to define some approach there. I don't think we are trying to force something as much as bring people together to discuss those things and define an approach that unifies the ecosystem.
Yeah, I think the things you're saying make sense. It would be helpful if those are explicitly in the charter. So just for the sake of time, Stephen, and then Dims.
Yeah.
Tim, if you're quick, then we're going to move on.
So yeah, so charter updates. I think what I have done, at least in the past, in working group formation, is lay out something that is kind of like a rough draft to kind of paint the picture, and as Tim mentioned, making that first action to come back to the charter and work on refining those. The king making stuff, I'm not too worried about that. I think at least from the perspective of the Kubernetes community, I think the work product that we have is intended to be core for the project that we're delivering day to day, right? So I mean, I have more concerns about that on the CNCF level than I would within the project. I think if everyone is coming to the table and SIGs are happy to own the components that are the output of this working group, then we should be moving in the right path. I think using that work product as a proof point for CNCF working groups, or I forgot exactly what the name of that body of work is within the CNCF, maybe user group, working group, but I believe it's within would be within tag runtime. So I think using what we're doing, like we start now so that we have a proof point as that group is doing their discussions as well, for a baseline for any solutions that people might develop afterwards.
Abdullah, one of the reasons for splintering earlier that I kind of gleaned reading between the lines was that, hey, it's more difficult to get things through in Kubernetes. There is more steps that you need to take, and it's easier for us to just grab whatever we can and like change it however we want it to be. That's how clone and do whatever they want at whatever time period that they want to do it. Seem to be part of the reasoning for the earlier people moving away from and making their own copies of Java API or whatever, right? Like, so what do we need to do to be able to get those kinds of people back?
I think the working group is the solution here, and it is part of the solution for this problem. Like once you see that there are people who core contributors who are invested in batch, then you're going to get that momentum. Again, I keep coming back to the services example. There's a ton of momentum there because there are a ton of people invested in there and willing to have a discussion around how to implement things properly and whatnot. We do not have that weight for batch. At least from the like, I don't know, past 4 years where I've been engaged with the project, that did not exist. We did put that weight initially, like again, us invested, me and Eldo, we fixed a few things in the job API. We're seeing more traction to use the job API now. That's what encouraged us to invest even more in core Kubernetes to make it friendlier for batch workloads.
Thank
All
you.
right, Tim, real quick.
So really quickly, just again on the leadership side, I know that this is a really common pattern, and I know that there are a number of quite opinionated people in the user space side of this. So this fragmented set of frameworks, like from an engineering principles perspective, I totally get what you're saying, but possibly those other entities, the folks are going to think, well, that's actually our unique value add. We've taken this thing that's not great and we've made it better in our special sauce. So they may hear commonizing and unifying as lowest common denominizing and not like it. So again, like the leads of the working group are really going to have a strong bridge building mindset, because just making the work group doesn't mean that people are going to come. You're going to have to pull some and really convince them that you are making something good for them that they want to embrace.
Yeah, I mean, point well taken. Just one quick comment here. Like, I see that I think we want to contribute internally as like an on-ramp to something more advanced, let's say. So, and that's the theme that I think, like, or the mental model that I have in mind. I want something that users, if they don't want something complicated, they can use plain Kubernetes. If they want something more complicated, then there should be an easy way for them to just basically use that without changing everything that they have deployed in the previously.
All right. So a few AIs, I think, incorporating feedback from this discussion into the PR, finalizing the leads selection based on some of the feedback here as well, and then getting acts from the sponsoring SIGs and then sending it back to steering. Does that make sense to everyone, or are there other AIs to include?
At which point do we get a liaison? And what does that mean? I'm not sure what it means.
We'll assign one from steering. Typically, we try to load balance and also pick someone who is maybe not on that in that group, but is familiar with it. So that'll be part of what we provide when we ACK it.
Sounds good.
And steering members, once they've done these AIs, is it safe to say we're ready to vote and make a call?
Yeah, I think that makes sense.
Okay.
I would say, re-liaisons, trying to find someone who is aligned with some of the sponsoring SIGs would probably be useful.
All right.
All right.
Sounds good. Thank you. Moving on. Armad, I think you are up next. This was for the Kate's Infra Proud Jobs migration.
Yes. Hi, everyone. So, as you know, Kate's Infra is responsible for the job migration from Google to the community infrastructure. And over time, we succeed to basically migrate the merging block jobs and the master informing jobs, but the progress about this migration is very slow because not everyone have time to fully work on that, or Kate's Infra is understaffed for the backlog. So I came here to basically ask the steering committee member as liaison to the SIG to reach out to the SIG chair and basically ask them to take care of that migration, at least the job they are responsible for. So we basically distribute the workload of this migration over on the community. Because last year I spent a lot of time personally talking to SIG about job migration. We succeed to basically migrate 6 scalability jobs, but only one or two people is not enough to finish this task.
So looking really quickly at the list, is it possible to get to get this sorted by SIGs that are responsible? Because I think it would be easier to federate if we had that. Like I can make some educated guesses based on the names of the jobs, but like.
I think we don't necessarily need to filter or sort the SIG responsible, because I mean, if I basically look at this infra repo, all the job I already sort by the SIGs. So if we can just take a look at this list and wish out the SIG responsible, it's enough.
That was actually going to be my question as well. It's hard for me to tell what SIG has what work to do. Typically, when one group wants to ask other SIGs to do things, they'll spawn issues for the SIGs with really specific instructions, like this SIG needs to do these things, and then ask the SIG organizers to triage and prioritize and deal with that issue. So
okay.
Pointing a bunch of people to a single umbrella issue is often not very effective.
Okay, the link of, I'm sorry, it's now I understand. The link of the I post is misleading. So if let's say we ignore this issue specifically, basically the request from me is basically to say to all the SIG to make sure their job run on community infrastructure. That's the request. Because right now we basically, I mean, we have a pretty good list on job running on community infrastructure, but there's still a lot of job running inside Google, and they are basically owned by all the SIGs. So the request is basically say to the SIGs to basically they have to make sure all their jobs run on community infrastructure. I put the issue as an example of things we are working on, but it's misleading.
Okay. Bob and then Tim, I'm not sure who raised their hand first. And Christoph, I'm sorry.
I think it was Christoph first.
Okay, go for it.
Yeah, I was just going to echo that, like, so I would request going back to SIG-Kate's infra, like, yeah, if you're asking other SIGs to do stuff, that it needs to be very clearly detailed, because so the assumption that I'm hearing is that a SIG will know, and like whoever is picking up on this will know right off the bat which jobs are theirs and what they need to do with them to migrate them from Google infrastructure to community infrastructure. So having a checklist or a very defined list is important, because we have to remember the SIG chair, who is likely the person who's going to get pinged on this, will not necessarily have the technical expertise. Like, that will not be universal across the board. They may have it, they may not have it. And they need to know, okay, who do I need to talk to? What kind of skill set and background am I going to need for my SIG, for whoever like takes ownership of this, not because it won't necessarily be the chair, to actually execute on it. So looking at, like, just scrolling through what's been documented there, it's definitely laid out in a way that if you have the background and understand what is entailed there, yes, it's clear, but it's not if you don't have that background. And I think that is something that is fair, you know, at least in my perspective, to kind of push back on SIG-Kate's infra, that like, hey, we need this broken down a little bit more for a SIG that doesn't necessarily, or like an individual, because that SIG chair may not have that individual depth of knowledge and background of like what is actually needed here, step by step, a checklist of like, go review these jobs, or here's like the instructions around what you should be doing to actually do that migration, and have that all upfront and linked.
Yeah, I agree. And it sounds like Bob, that was echoing what Bob was going to say as well. Arno, I think for like the steering liaisons, like our goal is really to distribute work and have sort of these SIG to SIG interactions not require us as a middleman. So if you have these detailed requests like per SIG and are not getting traction, that's a helpful thing to bring up. Yeah, like in the leads meeting, rather than like pulling us in. So we're happy to make suggestions for ways to collaborate between SIGs and channels to do that and ways to do that. But the point of liaisons is really not to be like something one SIG escalates to and then goes and nags another SIG. So.
Okay.
I do think the general theme there where Arnaud is saying we have a gap where we need these things to happen consistently across everything. There does need to be a coordinating point, and the liaisons can be that, but they do need to be well formed still.
Yeah, I mean, I definitely agree. We need to break this down, because like even if you get to the point of, hey, the chair isn't talking to me, we still need to know like what exactly they aren't talking to you about, like instead of like the ginormous errand issue.
I do want to point out, at least for, I mean, just to Kate's Info's credit, but they do quite a bit of documentation work, and I think that, you know, if the one of the examples like migrate away from GS cop CI, right? That is well detailed, right? So I think a lot of the work may already be there, just getting it into that large umbrella issue and saying who it belongs to, right? If it's, it's SIG cluster, cluster lifecycle or what have you, making sure it's just like, I know who owns it, right? That way, like these mini umbrella issues we can assign to people, or Kate's and Frick can assign to people, right? I think most of the details are there. It's just not immediately clear from the way that the larger issue is structured.
One last thing from me, which is Arno, how much headroom do we have in our budget for all the new jobs that are coming in through this effort? Will we blow the budget?
It's an interesting question because we don't know what costs. We really don't know what's look like the global billing for all the jobs.
Yeah.
I think this is something we discover over time every time we do a migration. So we don't know at this. I mean, I don't know. As a person outside of Google, I really don't know what's going to cost us to migrate all the jobs. Because
if I remember right, we blew the budget on this one of the scalability job that was running beyond its lifetime, right? So that is something that we need to think of a little bit more in Kate's Infra on how to do this gradually. So when we bump the ceiling, then we should kind of like, hey, stop, because we won't have the budget to run everything.
Budget is not directly related to the pro jobs. It's basically an underlying issue related to artifact distribution. And lucky things, Barry sent some help, so I'm supposed to talk to someone about this.
Okay.
But in general, the pro job are not the one thing I would say we need to care if we from a budget perspective, because we can optimize that over time. But in order to optimize that, we need to have the full, basically all the pro jobs running inside the community infrastructure.
Yeah, got it. Thank you.
All right. We're out of time, so I'm going to call it there. There was one item about KubeCon EU that we can take to Slack. And then the liaison issue actually got mentioned earlier with the draft that's ready for review. And then I'll just make a plug for, if you're taking issues and working on them, put them in the in progress column in the project board. I saw Stephen doing that on a few things anyway. So as we are picking stuff up, if we want to sort of get in the habit of indicating status as we're picking up issues, that would be helpful.
So just to, yeah, just to mention there, I think we need to make sure we're talking about steering operational changes in the next public meeting. That topic has been bumped twice. So if we want people to have visibility, we should be talking about that publicly.
Sounds good. And if we might want to break that up into a few like concrete questions or topics. It's a pretty vague topic right now, which makes it sort of seem unbounded. So if we want to think through how to break that up into specific questions, that might be useful. All right, thank you everyone for attending, and I'm going to stop the recording. See you all online.
Hey, made it without